Greetings, Culture Warriors. This is Jeff Vieira, author of Culture is Everything, and your host for this Dispatch from the Front. Today, I'd like to talk to you about a situation which can bring the company's values into stark relief. So, a great way to assess if a company is actually living its values is to look for these situations and follow closely what the company does. The article is from Entrepreneur Magazine, and the headline is, What to Do If an Employee Sues You or Your Company. It's by Ejiofor Francis. Research reveals that over 1 in every 10 small business owners get sued by their employees or customers. A study from the U.S. Chamber Institute of Legal Reform also showed 43% of small businesses were either threatened with a lawsuit or battled with one. Lawsuits can do tremendous financial and emotional damage, but there are smart ways to handle employee lawsuits to ensure that you protect your company and its finances and are able to focus on business cash flow, sales, and your other employees. Why employees sue a company? Irrespective of the level of care, concern, great pay, and good working environment you provide your employees, there may still be unsatisfied workers who feel like they've been treated unjustly. And if that's the case, these workers may take extra steps to show their displeasure, and that may be evident in litigation. More so, employees who believe they are unfairly treated may sue for retribution. A lawsuit may also be filed just to make up for the finance that will be lost as a result of job termination. Accordingly, there are several reasons for employee lawsuits, and some of these are wrongful termination, wage and salary violation, injury due to negligence on the part of the employer, violation of the Immigration and Nationality Act, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission federal workplace discrimination laws violations, harassment at the workplace or uncomfortable working conditions, fired for bad performance even after being applauded for good performance. How to reduce the threat level from an employee lawsuit. The best ways to reduce the level of threat to your small business. 1. Expect the lawsuit. Even before a lawsuit is filed, you'll be sent a legal demand letter that is either written by the employee in question, their attorney, or another entity. This letter often requires that your company take corrective steps. The letter may also threaten to sue your business if the demands are not met. Accordingly, send the demand letters to an attorney with the right level of expertise. They'll be able to examine the content of the letter and determine its credibility. 2. Seek legal help. Next move, if you do get sued, is to seek legal help or advice from a professional defense attorney or law firm. You may already have a lawyer that handles your company's legal cases, but it's better to resort to an attorney that specializes in handling a particular lawsuit. For instance, whether your company is faced with a criminal case, civil case, or an employee lawsuit, it's best you seek an attorney who understands the basic phases of criminal lawsuits, civil lawsuits, or employee lawsuits, respectively and on time. Strategically, this is to ensure that they can handle every complex nature of the case. More so, it will prevent you from attracting more legal issues to your company. Much more, you'll have more understanding of what you're dealing with and what could potentially come out of the lawsuit. 3. Do not contact the plaintiff directly. Do not contact the plaintiff directly, given that you may or say or do things that may implicate you in the law court. Communication will be established with the employee by your attorney and that of the plaintiffs, unless we forget you need to respond to the lawsuit within the stipulated time frame you've been given. 4. Safeguard your finances. At this point, you need to protect your finances, be it those from the business or your personal income. If there's the slightest chance that there will be a trial, you need to protect your finances from being claimed legally. In this case, you can get good business insurance that will protect your finances. There's liability assurance, which helps save your business from any potential claim that may be laid on it. Contact your insurance provider. If you already have an insurance provider, you also need to reach out to them. There are business insurance policies that cover small businesses when lawsuits of this nature arise. However, do not automatically assume that your insurance will cover you. This is because the circumstances of the suit may make it non-recoverable by the policy. Nonetheless, an employer's liability insurance will help to cover lawsuits from your employees. Remain calm. While this may sound like a difficult thing to do, especially if you're angry or feeling frustrated, it is better to stay calm and be optimistic that things will work out. You also need to ensure that your business processes are running smoothly and not affected by the legal action. Protect yourself from future lawsuits. Inarguably, the lawsuit you may be facing now may not be the last of its kind. Other employees may want to take the same path, which is why you need to create a solid HR foundation that will involve updating the employee handbook. Also, employees can be offered anti-harassment, anti-discrimination training, and a well-detailed procedure on how complaints should be filed. Be smart about protecting yourself. Getting sued by an employee does not mean you'll run into an insurmountable loss. For the latter not to happen, you need to smartly plan how to handle these threats. It'll ensure at the end of the day, you do not draw more legal problems while trying to handle the one at hand. Much more, it will not be at the expense of your small business. Okay. So, I'm going to give you some advice that I think you'll find will prove to be better advice. If you want to avoid lawsuits from your employees, treat them fairly. There are very few people, especially when you talk about small business, very few people who are such sociopaths that they seek these kind of lawsuits simply as a way of milking the company. They exist, but should you really build your whole life around the fact that they exist? I would say no. What's more common is that people come aboard your company in good faith. They give you the best of their effort and the cream of their talent to help you build that business. And they feel betrayed if you treat them unfairly. Here's another tip. Don't hire people who have a habit of viewing their life through the lens of being treated unfairly. So if they don't go a single day without a grievance, if they complain constantly about every little setback in their life and assume that there is a conspiracy behind each one, then you need to make sure that your hiring process is such that you do not bring them aboard in the first place. This is why we say, as we go through the work that you need to do in order to make sure that you have the right culture and that we're going to live that culture, you need to change your hiring and firing practices. You need to put culture first. So the person may be a terrific expert at doing the particular task you're hiring them to do, but if they have a marked personality defect in the area of needing to see absolute fairness as they define it on a daily basis, then you don't need to hire them. Let them move on and be somebody else's problem. That said, is it bad to value fairness? No, of course not. We want to treat people fairly. That's number one. That's how we avoid these kind of problems. First, treat people fairly. If you treat people fairly all the time, it's going to be hard for them to make the case in court that there is a pattern of behavior here which is going to get you punished. There is a tendency, especially in corporate America, to respond to this through dueling documentation, as though writing things down somehow makes them real. And I think by and large that courts see through this. The reason why I think this is because so many of these lawsuits, at least when big companies are involved, get settled. So if every manager who is a bit sketchy keeps a dossier justifying themselves and looking at everybody else in the dimmest possible light, if that were an effective tactic, these companies wouldn't be settling all the time. Why? Because they would have all the evidence that they need to prevail in court. Instead, the focus ought to be treat people fairly, bring people aboard who are fair people and have a realistic view of the world. Within your organizations, having people who are known for their concern to ensure that a basic fairness prevails is a good thing. They will help identify and highlight any abuses before they rise to the level of things which become lawsuits. When we talk about EEOC and anti-discrimination law, there's a couple of things you have to understand. Number one is that if you feel you are the victim of discrimination, most people will counsel you that most of the time you don't have much of a case. And anyone who has been laid off past the age of 50 will tell you that. Because even though ageism is a very real thing in the workplace at many a company, and even though abuses abound in that area, the lawsuits are relatively few. Because you have to be able to demonstrate that there's a pattern of behavior there. Usually companies are smart enough that when they let people go, a recent podcast we talked about Weight Watchers, and there was a suspicion in the article of ageism because so many of the women who happened to work there were over the age of 50. They felt like there wasn't really ageism in play, at least a couple of them, because they let some younger women go too. But of course, that's not how it works. What happens is they target people that are getting close to retirement so as to not have to pay their pension out. And then they'll throw in a couple of people they just don't want around who are younger. And again, the court can see right through that sort of thing. But it still isn't the easiest thing in the world to prove that kind of pattern of behavior in court. And so people generally don't rush to the attorney's office in those situations. So your best bet is to make sure that you put culture first when you hire. Make sure you put culture first when you fire. And in between, follow your cultural values with regard to your employees, especially when you have the value of fairness. Nobody's perfect. And of course, everyone's needs are very different. With my own children, I don't worry about giving them exactly the same thing in exactly the same proportion. My objective is to give them what they need. And that's different for each of my children. Now, will they tell you that I'm unfair? Probably. We're about to enter the teenage years of my eldest, so I imagine that that's coming. But what I've learned is that my job as a parent is not to just dole out 4 equal slices of whatever we give, whether that be love, whether that be money, whether that be education. That's not the name of the game. I'm trying to help my children become the best version of themselves that they can be. And each of them being a different individual, they each have different needs. And so we emphasize some things with one child and other things with another as their needs dictate. And the hope is that we'll meet enough of those needs over the course of their time with us that they'll be really good people once they leave the house and get out into life as adults. That's the hope anyway. I don't think it's that much different with our employees. We're trying to help them grow and be the best version of themselves that they can possibly be. I get very irate when I hear people talk about this growth in terms of a ceiling. Oh, well, that person can only get to this level, whatever that level, how arbitrarily that's designed. That's absolute nonsense. I spent 25 years of my career raising ceilings for people so that they can be better, so that they can do more, they can be more productive, they can enjoy the fruits of their labor more, they can contribute more to their organizations and the people around them, and they can carve out capacity so they can do the same for others. That's what we do, all of us happy warriors in the business process improvement space. And that's our job as leaders, as managers, is to help people grow to the point where they can do more than they ever thought possible. And for everyone, that's different. So you have to be careful with people who want to measure fairness in terms of, well, everyone should have the same salary. Well, that's not really fair. Some people produce a lot more than others of what the company values. And should they not be rewarded appropriately for that? In other cases, some people's talents are so rare that that's the market rate for getting that a person with those skills into your organization. Should they not be compensated for that? In other cases, people are engaged in dangerous, risky work, whereas others never have to take that sort of risk. Should they not be compensated appropriately? A number of years ago, I worked for a company where our vice president made the mistake. He had his printer outside his office, and he made the mistake of leaving everybody's compensation information on the printer. Somebody heisted the document when they saw it, and they passed it around to everybody. They brought it to me. I was a manager in the organization. And they passed it to me on the down low, and I passed it right back to them. And they said, well, don't you want to know? And I said, what is there to know? Anybody on the list who happens to make more than I do either contributes more than I do, or they were a better negotiator than I was. Either way, they deserve what they got. That doesn't impact me, except maybe to inspire me to do better. But stoking the fires of envy by having people believe that there's an underlying unfairness because not everybody's paid the same thing, as though we were a little Bolshevik commune out in the hinterland somewhere, that doesn't make a lot of sense. If you don't like what you're being paid, ask to be paid more. And if they don't give you more, then decide if you want to stay. But it doesn't do anybody any good to get disgruntled over it. And it doesn't do anybody much good to attribute to malice what isn't in evidence. There are differences between people. Some of these are obvious, some of these are not. And so we have to be really careful when we talk about fairness to not look at things through only one lens and think that that lens is dispositive. That's the only reason. That's it. That's the one that determines whether this person gets this or that person gets that. I had a friend of mine who was a manager, and he had a person working for him who was going through a really tough time. He was an alcoholic who had started drinking again, and his drinking had gotten to the point where he was ill much of the time. At one point, he stopped showing up for work for 30 days. It's a long time. At the end of the 30 days, he'd bottomed out, he'd gotten himself some help, and he was returning to work. At this particular company, they would give title promotions in between major promotions. So you'd see an improvement in the level of your title, no additional money, but you'd see improvement. It was just a way of honoring people who were improving. And so my friend gave this person that title promotion when it came up a few months later. And this absolutely scandalized another friend of mine who was a terrific performer and had been looking forward to that promotion himself and couldn't understand why this guy, who clearly wasn't really performing, and he disappeared for 30 days. You can't really blame him for being upset about that. So he confronted my friend, the manager, about this issue. And his response was, I'm trying to save his life. I'm trying to save his life. You see, my friend, the manager, had come from a family that had issues with alcoholism, and he knew the drill. He knew that there's a point in your drinking when you get so bad that you really do come to a fork in the road. You can continue drinking and die, or you can stop drinking and live. And this person was at that point. And it wasn't hard for him to see the hand of God in this juncture coming when he was working for my friend, the manager. The one person who could understand this and not simply fire him over a Zoom call and just wait to read in the paper that he'd been found dead in the gutter. The reason I know about this story is because it wasn't that long afterward that my friend, the manager, had a heart attack and passed away unexpectedly. And I heard that story at his funeral from my friend who had been passed over for that title promotion. Because you see, that incident didn't only save the life of that person who had a severe drinking problem. It caused my other friend to rethink his perspective on a lot of things. And so 2 lives, at least, were changed in the way my friend, the manager, handled that situation. Now, was it fair? Depends on what your definition of fairness was. And is. But I would encourage you that if you're looking to avoid lawsuits, you have to consider the human being involved. Do not simply consider policy. Do not fall into the trap of trying to write policy that covers every situation. It never does. But be a human being. Your best chance of avoiding being dragged into court and to have your life's monument torn down before your eyes is to be human. A simple conversation with somebody, one-on-one, without the recorders present, without the cast of thousands there, one-on-one, can get to the bottom of these things. And in the end, that's a much more effective way to deal with lawsuits than hiring all the lawyers, going and getting all the insurance. I'll tell you another story. That same manager who made the mistake of leaving compensation information out on his printer wound up getting sued by an employee for unlawful termination in a state which was very sympathetic to that. We worked for a company which was a Fortune 500 company. So you had a Davy and Goliath situation setting up in court. He refused to settle. Against all advice, refused to settle. Because he believed that he was fully in the right. Period. Dot. End of story. And that the person bringing the lawsuit was not. And this dragged on for years. Years of depositions, and the company backed him. The company said, okay, if you're willing to fight it, we're willing to fight it. And in the end, if I recall correctly, I believe the company lost. So the lesson here, I think, is not just settle regardless. I have to believe that if the VP in question had respected the person enough to just talk with them and hear their side, even if that side was completely wrong, I think it would have been a different outcome. Certainly it would have cost the company less. Now, lawyers will say, you're crazy, you'll just, whatever. At some point, there are worse things than settlements, than lawsuits, than the financial impact of these things. And that's losing your humanity. That's creating a situation where you view employees as potential threats instead of what they are, your allies in accomplishing what you need to get accomplished. And when you get to that point where you're looking at each other across a courtroom or across a conference table, it's really too late. So take it from me, my friends. Don't let it get to that point. Do your best to deal with people in a human fashion. Well, does it mean you'll never get taken advantage of? No. But that karmic wheel will come around, and the people who took advantage of you will ultimately get what's coming to them. But the people that see you treating people with such humanity, such kindness, will never forget it. As I have never forgotten my friend who helped save a man's life when he could have terminated his employment. Thank you. Have a great day.